Good evening. This is John Daly standing in front of Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. This is indeed a red-letter night in the history of Ford's Theater, April 14, 1865. Because tonight, President Abraham Lincoln and his party will attend a special charity performance of the celebrated English comedy, Our American Cousin. Inside the theater, the curtain has already gone up. Outside, here in front of the theater, the crowd of curious spectators stand around.
April 14, 1865. Place, Washington, D.C.
You are there. Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. CBS takes you back to one of the great dramas in our nation's history. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. You are there.
You Are There is based on authentic historical fact and quotation.
And now,
Washington, April 14th, 1865, and John Daly.
The damp and misty weather in Washington tonight has not dampened the ardor of the crowds who for 4 long days now have been wildly celebrating the surrender of General Lee to General Grant. The people here are in high spirits, gathered around Ford's Theater, which is a 3-story red stone building, windows and entrances in gray. Tulteville's Saloon is on the right, Ferguson's Saloon is on the left, and both of them are jammed. The windows and doors of the houses along both sides of the street are open. People are hanging out of them for a look at the president. Although the curtain has gone up on the play, some members of the cast who are not on stage at the moment stand around in their costumes for a look at Mr. Lincoln. There's John Daly and Mrs. Helen Muzzy. There's young Miss Jane Gowdy and John Wilkes Booth, the handsome, dashing Shakespearean favorite. He is not in the performance tonight, by the way. I think I see over there. Oh, yes, there's Mr. Harry Ford, one of the 3 brothers who manage this theater. Now, if I can just get through to him, excuse me, please.
I beg your pardon.
Oh, let me push through here. I'm sorry, but watch the cable. Oh, Mr. Ford. Mr. Ford.
Yes, sir?
Say, Mr. Ford, this is CBS. You have a great crowd here tonight.
Yes, the theater is sold out.
And have you raised your prices for tonight?
Tonight is a charity benefit. The orchestra is $1, the dress circle and the parquet 75 cents, and the family circle is 25 cents.
I see. Well, this is the second time President Lincoln has attended your theater, isn't it, Mr. Ford?
Yes, and tonight he's going to sit in the same box. And I brought in that old rocker he likes.
Oh, thanks very much, Mr. Ford.
Not at all, anytime.
Thanks a lot. I think I see John F. Parker, the president's personal guard, arriving on foot. Evidently, he's come ahead of the president to be on hand when Mr. Lincoln and his party arrive. Now, if I can get through to him, excuse me, please, let me through. I'm sorry, but watch the cable. Mr. Parker! Oh, Mr. Parker.
Yes?
Say, Mr. Parker, this is CBS. Has the president's carriage left the White House? Is he on his way over here?
Yes, he and Mrs. Lincoln left about 10 minutes ago to pick up Major Rathbone and Miss Harris.
Well, aren't General Grant and Mrs. Grant in the party?
No, they were supposed to come, but General Grant left on the evening train for Burlington.
Oh, that's too bad. We'd kind of hoped we'd see the general as well as Mr. Lincoln. Say, by the way, who is Miss Harris?
Well, that's Miss Clara Harris, daughter of the senator from the state of Maine.
Oh, yes, of course. And Major Rathbone is an attaché at the War Department.
That's right.
Yes.
Excuse me, please.
Right. Yes, the president's carriage is just coming down 10th Street now. It has crossed F Street. It's going to pull up right here at the carriage platform. The president is smiling, bowing, doffing his high black silk hat to the crowd. And the band that's been waiting here for this moment is picking up its instruments and getting ready to play. Burns, the coachman, is slowing up the horses now. The carriage is stopping at the platform. Forbes, the footman, has jumped down to assist the party as they get out. Mrs. Lincoln and Miss Harris are getting out, and now the president, followed by Major Rathbone. The band wants to play a tune. They're asking the president what it is he wants to hear, but it'll probably be Yankee Doodle, Marching Through Georgia, or Rally Round the Flag. The president just said something to the band leader, but in all of this racket, I just can't hear what he's saying. Oh, do you hear that? It's Dixie. Mr. Lincoln has asked the Union Band to play the Confederate song, and they've responded with a will. hope you can hear me above all this din. The crowd understands the meaning of Mr. Lincoln's request. It's his policy of forgiveness and reconciliation with the South, of harmony for the nation. The war is over. The United States of America is now one great nation. And Mr. Ford is leading the way into the theater, up the gray stone steps. Mr. Lincoln's just a few feet away. Oh, Mr. President, this is CBS, sir. May I ask you a question?
Fire away.
Well, as you know, Mr. President, the newspapers and a part of the clergy have been opposed to your practice of attending the theater. And I'm sure that...
Yes, I know. Some think I do wrong to go to the opera and the theater, but it rests me. I love to be alone and yet to be with the people. I want to get this burden off, to change the current of my thoughts. A hearty laugh relaxes me, and I seem better able after it to bear my cross.
I understand, sir.
Good night.
Good night, Mr. Lincoln, and thank you. And now the presidential party has entered the door. A CBS microphone is inside the theater at the rear of the orchestra. President Lincoln will pass it in just a minute and so enter the theater, and Don Hollenbeck.
The audience doesn't yet know the president has arrived. The ladies might be interested, by the way, to know that Mrs. Lincoln is wearing a white silk crinoline under her cloak. I'm trying to see here. It's an elaborate headdress of flowers and combs over her curls. There's silken mittens and a shawl held together at her throat with a brooch. The president, well, he seems to have lost a lot of weight, but, oh, he looks happy tonight, very happy. And now the party is turning right and going upstairs to the boxes. The president should be there in just a minute. The audience has caught sight of the president. The play stops. The orchestra strikes up Hail to the Chief. And now CBS has a booth directly across the theater from the president's box. And I see that John Daly's reached it, so over to John Daly.
We're in the CBS box now. I can see the president entering his box across the theater. We have Columbia microphones on the stage and in the audience. I'm going to open them both and let you hear what's going on. The president is in his box now. The audience is standing. Mr. Lincoln is acknowledging the welcome. Beaming, he nods his head and waves to the jam-packed crowd. And now, motioning towards the stage and the interrupted play, Mr. Lincoln sits down. The ovation continues, but following the president's lead, slowly, almost by sections, the audience resumes its seats and the play will resume in just a moment. Our American Cousin by Tom Taylor, by the way, is an eccentric comedy, as many of you probably know. It's a popular favorite, been performed at least 1,000 times. The play revolves around a typical, drawling Yankee in England who lights his cigar with an old will, burning the document to ashes and thereby throwing a fortune into the hands of an English cousin. And now, the CBS microphones on the stage will pick up some of the dialogue. Lord Dundreary, a silly, foppish Englishman, is being teased by Florence the heroine, played by the star Miss Laura Keene.
Yes, but a lonely one.
What sort of night had she?
Oh, a very refreshing one, thanks to the draught I prescribed for her.
What? Have you been prescribing for Georgina, Lord Dundreary?
Oh, yes, quite. You see, I gave her a draught that cured the effect of the draught. And that draught was a draught that didn't pay the doctor's bill. Didn't that draught...
Good gracious, what a number of drafts. You almost have a game of drafts. What's the matter?
That was a joke, that was.
Anyone can see the draft has been suspended.
Miss Keene has very neatly injected a bit of the national peace celebration into the play. With Lord Dundreary making so much of the word draft, Miss Keene threw in the line, anyone can see the draft has been suspended. And everyone in the audience knows that General Grant suspended the military draft this very morning. That was quite keen of Miss Keene, if I may be permitted the pun. Well, the president enjoyed that joke, too. He's smiling broadly. The play continues, and we'll take you again to the stage presently, but on this gala night, the audience is as interested in the presidential party as they are in the play, although because of the angle at which the box is set, they can only see Miss Harris and Major Rathbone. The presidential party is occupying boxes numbers 7 and 8, the partition between them having been removed to make it roomier. The boxes are decorated with 4 flags. The president is seated in that old rocker that Mr. Ford told us about before. There's a chair at the door of the box in which John Parker, the guard, is sitting. He can't see the stage, but he can hear the actors' voices. Oh, evidently John Parker wants to see and hear, for he's now getting up from his chair and taking a seat in the dress circle with a clear view of the stage. Mrs. Lincoln is seated on the president's right, and from time to time she leans over on his arm and they exchange a few words. The president appears completely relaxed, and perhaps his mind is on other things. Perhaps he is looking at his wife and thinking, we've had a hard time since we came to Washington, but the war is over, and with God's blessing, we may hope for 4 years of peace and happiness, and then we'll go back to Illinois and pass the rest of our lives in quiet. But then it's more likely that Mr. Lincoln is just plain enjoying himself tonight, for the president is listening with obvious pleasure to Mrs. Mount Chessington, an English lady in the cast, and Harry Hawk, who is playing Asa Trenchard, the American cousin. Now, once again, our microphones on the stage pick up the play.
Beware, Mr. Trenchard. You are not used to the manners of good society, and that alone will excuse the impertinence of which you have been guilty.
Mrs. Mount Chessington flounces off in aristocratic dudgeon, leaving the drawling Yankee alone on the stage.
Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You sock-dologizing old man-trap.
What was that? It sounded like a shot, but there's no shot in the play. One moment. Oh, Major Rathbone is struggling with a man in Mr. Lincoln's box. A man who is stabbing wildly at him with a knife. Major Rathbone's giving ground before that knife, and now his attacker has leapt over the railing. He's on the stage. The man has risen. He's running across the stage. He's gone through the stage exit directly under this box. That was Major Rathbone who shouted out, "Stop that man." Someone in the audience has leapt over the footlights after him. Something has happened. Something is terribly wrong. This is not part of the play. Blue smoke is curling from President Lincoln's box. I can't see him because Miss Harris and the Major and Mrs. Lincoln are surrounding him. President Lincoln has been shot. That was Mrs. Lincoln who just cried out, "He has shot Mr. Lincoln." The man did it. The man who ran across the stage. The man who grappled with the Major. Don Hollenbeck is out there in the theater, already fighting his way up to the president's box. So go ahead, Hollenbeck.
This is Don Hollenbeck. I guess we're on the air here. I'm trying to get through this crowd to find out what's going on. I don't know what's happened. I don't know what's happened.
What is it? What's happened? Tell me what's happened.
Someone has shot Mr. Lincoln.
It was Booth!
Who?
John Booth!
One member of this frantic crowd has identified Mr. Lincoln's attacker. He says it was Booth, the actor, John Wilkes Booth. We'll try to get someone who was in or near Mr. Lincoln's box. Let me through, please. Let me through. Watch the cables, please. Watch it just a minute. Thank you very much. The whole theater's in an uproar. Everyone's standing, running up and down the aisles. Women are moaning and fainting. Miss Keene is handing water up to Mr. Lincoln's box. Watch that cable, please. Men are lifting up an army sergeant, an army surgeon up on their shoulders. The stage is swarming with people. We'll get through to Mr. Lincoln's box now in just a second.
Stand back! Back!
Soldier's blocking
Everyone
the door.
back!
His bayonet's poised. That soldier's crying. Tears are streaming from his eyes. There's an officer. Lieutenant!
Lieutenant Crawford, sir.
Lieutenant Crawford, what happened?
Well, I was sitting in the seat near the door to Mr. Lincoln's box. I saw Booth go in.
Just walk in, but where were the guards?
Well, I don't know. I heard a shot. I saw Booth leap over the railing. His spur caught in the flag as he jumped. It ripped the flag and broke his fall and maybe broke his leg.
Oh, are you sure it was Booth?
I swear it.
What did you do? Did you get into the president's box?
Well, I rushed it, but the door was barred. Booth had barred it when he went in from the inside, and we broke through. Major Rathbone let the doctors through, only the doctors. Look, have they caught Booth? Did he get away?
Just a minute, Lieutenant. The door is opening. 4 soldiers are carrying Mr. Lincoln out. Where are you taking him? Are you taking him to the White House?
No, not to the White House.
Doctor, is the wound mortal? Will Mr. Lincoln live?
Guards! Clear the passage!
President Lincoln is being carried out of the theater now.
Daly!
I've just been informed that John Daly's out in the street again, so go ahead, Daly.
Lincoln has been shot!
2 more soldiers have joined the 4 who are carrying the president out here into 10th Street. The street is jammed with people who have heard the news. It's a wild, awed, panic-stricken, swirling mob. The guards are having a hard time breaking through the mob, crossing the street. The long roll you hear is the alert being sounded. There's a light in a house, and the door is open. A man stands at the door with a candle, calling to the group carrying Mr. Lincoln. They're taking the president in there. The number is 453, 453 10th Street. Anybody know who lives in that house?
Peterson! It's a Peterson house!
It's the only house available. The president's White House guard is thundering into the street. Perhaps you can hear the ring of their horses' hoofs on the cobblestone. They're flashing their sabers and clearing the street. President Lincoln has been shot. President Lincoln has been shot. There's been so much excitement. Only now the full horror of what has just happened at Ford's Theater is beginning to dawn. We will stay here in front of the Peterson house and bring you immediately any reports on Mr. Lincoln's condition. But we have just been informed that something has happened elsewhere in Washington that we don't know of here on the scene, and so we return you now to our studios.
And I'll give you the bulletins as fast as they come in, Quincy, as soon as we get it back from Daly down there on the street, right?
How much time have I got, though? How long am I on?
Wait a minute. Go ahead.
You're on the air. This is Quincy Howell. John Daly has just announced that an attempt has been made on the life of Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Secretary of State Seward, has also... just a second. Here's the bulletin. Secretary of State Seward has been attacked. A man entered the Seward house on Lafayette Square in Washington tonight. He overpowered all resistance, gained entrance to the secretary's bedroom, and slashed at Mr. Seward with a knife. It's not known whether the attacker was John Wilkes Booth or an accomplice, or whether the 2 attacks were connected. Now, here's Ned Calmer with more bulletins.
All Washington is in a state of panic this terrible night of April 14th, 1865. There are wild rumors that the entire cabinet has been murdered, that General Grant has been assassinated, that the war is not yet over. There's no evidence as yet that these other wild rumors are true. I repeat, the other rumors are not true so far as is known. Secretary of War Stanton has arrived at the house on 10th Street where Mr. Lincoln has been taken. He's in complete charge of the situation up to now. Now again, Quincy Howell.
John Wilkes Booth has escaped. He left Ford's Theater by a rear door, leapt on a horse that was waiting for him, and dashed off into the darkness. Someone from the audience chased him, just missed him, a matter of inches. Booth left Washington by the Navy Yard Bridge, where a sentry challenged him, and he gave his real name, John Wilkes Booth.
The following is the fiend's description. Age, 26, lithe and sinewy of body, having probably a broken leg, intense of speech and behavior. Height, 5 feet 8, weight, 160 pounds. Hair black, eyes black, heavy dark eyebrows, wears a large seal ring on little finger. When talking, moves his head forward, looks down. That is John Wilkes Booth. Rewards totaling $100,000 have been offered for his capture. Armed pursuit groups are after him already.
Booth must have had help. He just couldn't have committed this crime by himself or without lots of preparation. But who slashed Secretary Seward? Who crossed the Navy Yard Bridge a few moments after Booth? Why was it that Booth tried to see Vice President Johnson this afternoon and then left his calling card when he failed? Who cut the telegraph wires out of Washington and why? Where was the president's guard, John F. Parker? How could Booth have possibly gained entrance to the president's box without being challenged? These are some of the questions that the tragedy has raised here in this bewildered capital. How deep do the roots of this plot go? Does the trail perhaps lead right to persons highly placed up in the government? A note has just been handed me. John Daly, in front of the Patterson house, has news of President Lincoln's condition. So we take you now to the Peterson house.
This is John Daly in front of the Peterson House, where President Lincoln was carried after he was shot in Ford's Theater across the street. The president is sinking swiftly. He has not regained consciousness since Booth sent a single bullet fired at close range into the area behind the president's ear. The surgeons are discussing now the question of removing that bullet. Mrs. Lincoln is in there at the bedside, so is the president's son, Captain Robert Lincoln. Tad, the president's younger son, is at the White House. He has been assured that his father will live, but this was told the lad only to quiet him. Major Rathbone was slashed about the arm and shoulder by Booth and fainted from a loss of blood. He has been taken home. In addition to Secretary of War Stanton, most of the cabinet members have arrived, and here comes the Secretary of the Navy, Mr. Gideon Wells. Mr. Wells, this is CBS. We know how great your grief is at this moment, sir, but there are so many questions still to be answered about this frightful tragedy. Will you help us? Who is this amazing madman, John Wilkes Booth?
This lunatic, this unspeakable Judas, is a known secessionist who did not have the courage to don the uniform of his cause.
But what possible motive, sir, do you think he could have had in committing this hideous crime?
Only a mind deranged could have given birth to such an act. It may be that he thought to kindle again the dead spark of rebellion. If so, he is as great a fool as he is a villain. The war is over. The Union will stand. Booth has done the Confederate cause more harm than he can imagine.
What about the South, sir? What will the South think of Booth's act?
I do not know the mind of the South, but I predict that when the men who fought with Lee, in uniform, under a flag, and according to a clean code, hear of this day, they will shrink with horror from this vile deed. Assassination is not an American tradition. It never struck in this country until tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. I know that as Mr. Lincoln's friend and Secretary of the Navy, you want to go in and see him. A note has just been handed me. It says, "Oh, this is sad and tragic news. The president's pulse is still falling. His breathing becomes more labored." That's all the note says. As this night of unutterable gloom and sadness wears on, stern resolve melts. Great men weep openly. There's scarcely a dry eye in this crowd here. The door to the Peterson House is opening once again, and Mr. John Hay, President Lincoln's private secretary, is coming out. Mr. Hay, over this way, please.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hay, you've been close to Mr. Lincoln. Did he have any fear that he might be struck down before his great work was finished?
Our beloved president constantly received threatening letters, which he filed away in an envelope. In March last month, there were 80 letters in the envelope. It was marked assassination.
You mean letters from cranks and that sort?
Yes. In 1860 in Springfield, Mr. Lincoln saw a double image of himself in a mirror. One face held the glow of life and breath. The other shone ghostly pale, white, portent of a safe passage through the first term and death before the end of the second.
That was 5 years ago, then, that he had this omen?
Yes. But only last week, the president dreamed that he was walking through the White House amid the sound of great sobbing. In the East Room, he came upon a coffin guarded by soldiers, surrounded by a weeping throng. The president asked, "Who is dead in the White House?" And the soldier replied, "The president. He was killed by an assassin."
Well, how did Mr. Lincoln feel about these presentiments?
Perhaps he answered that question this afternoon. He was walking across the White House grounds, and he passed some profane, drunken men. Mr. Lincoln remarked to his guard, "Crook, do you know, I believe there are men who want to take my life, and I have no doubt they will do it. I know no one could do it and escape alive. But if it is to be done, it is impossible to prevent it."
Thank you, Mr. Hay. The tragic news of the attack on President Lincoln has spread around the world. And now, CBS takes you to important European capitals. First, to Buckingham Palace in London, England, and the voice of Her Britannic Majesty, Queen Victoria.
I speak to Mrs. Lincoln. No one can better appreciate than I, who am myself utterly broken-hearted by the loss of my own beloved husband, what your suffering must be. And I earnestly pray that you may be supported by him, to whom alone the sorely stricken can look for comfort.
And now to the French capital.
This is Paris. I am a French student speaking for thousands of us in the Latin Quarter. President Lincoln is a fellow citizen. There are no longer any countries shut up in narrow frontiers. Our country is everywhere, where there are neither masters nor slaves, where people live in liberty or fight for it.
From Paris, we take you now to the capital of Russia.
This is St. Petersburg, Russia. I will read a message from Leo Tolstoy, our great Russian author, who has just been informed of the attempted assassination of President Lincoln. The message reads, "In far places over the earth, on every continent, the name of Lincoln will be worshipped, and the personality of Lincoln will become a world folk legend. Many hardships and much experience brought him to the realization that the greatest human achievement is love. The greatness of Napoleon, Caesar, or Washington is moonlight by the sun of Lincoln. His example is universal and will last thousands of years. Lincoln is humanity." We return you now to the United States.
This is John Daly in front of the Peterson home on 10th Street. It is past 7 o'clock in the morning, April 15, 1865. President Lincoln was shot last night at 10:15. Doctors say there is no hope. The long vigil will soon be over. Here outside the Peterson house, a cold rain is falling. The sky is dully gray. The early morning mist is like a shroud. The hearts of men and women are overflowing with grief. Some are kneeling, some lifting their voices in the singing of spirituals. We are told that Mrs. Lincoln is not in the room with the president. She has made her last farewell and is seated in a back parlor. Captain Robert, the president's son, is leaning on Secretary Stanton's arm. He has borne himself well. Only twice has he given way to his overwhelming grief. The Reverend Dr. Gurley has spoken a prayer. For Abraham Lincoln, there will be black borders on the newspapers today, anguished sermons on Resurrection Sunday tomorrow. There will be the lying in state, the lonely train, the slow journey, the final resting place. There will be the end of the mortal, but the beginning of the immortal. For Abraham Lincoln will live on in the union he has saved, in the freedom he has given, in the dreams he has dreamed, in the vision he has seen, the vision under God of a new birth of freedom, of government of the people, by the people, for the people. Secretary of War Stanton is coming out of the Peterson house now. He pauses in the doorway, and the crowd, looking at his grief-stricken face, is suddenly silent. Mr. Stanton, how is Mr. Lincoln?
Now, he belongs to the ages.
The dread thing that we have awaited is come. President Lincoln is dead. The victim of Booth's vicious...
Washington, April 14th, 1865. Abraham Lincoln is assassinated at Ford's Theater.
This is Don Hollenbeck at the War Department in Washington. The Secretary of War has just released the following statement this 26th of April, 1865, and I quote it. The War Department has received an unconfirmed report that John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of President Lincoln, is in the vicinity of Port Conway, Virginia. Lieutenant Baker and Colonel Conger, two of the ablest agents of the United States Detective Bureau, have been rushed to Port Conway with a detachment of cavalry, signed Edwin M. Stanton, unquote, and end of statement. Port Conway is about 50 miles directly south of the nation's capital in Confederate territory. It's a small town on the north bank of the Rappahannock River.
April 26, 1865. Wanted, dead or alive, John Wilkes Booth.
The most tragic manhunt in the history of the United States approaches its grim climax. The Civil War has ended. President Lincoln has been assassinated. North and South alike, shocked and appalled, wait for the capture of the man who killed him. Wait for the end of a bitter calamity. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. When CBS Is There...
You are there.
You Are There is based on authentic historical fact and quotation. And now...
Washington, a corridor in the War Department, and Don Hollenbeck.
Today, it may see the capture of the well-known actor who only 12 days ago stole into a box at Ford's Theater here in Washington, fired a ball into the head of President Lincoln, and escaped. John Daly and Ned Calmer are in the area of Port Conway. They've been covering the manhunt with a CBS mobile unit, and we expect to hear from them momentarily. There have been charges that the federal government has been lax in its efforts to capture Booth, charges that Lincoln's assassination is part of a conspiracy that reaches high into the government. In the face of those charges, Secretary Stanton and the entire War Department are exerting their utmost efforts to end this manhunt, and today may see the break they've been waiting for. Quincy Howe has had a chance to weigh the possibilities inherent in the report that John Wilkes Booth is in Port Conway, so here is Quincy Howe.
Let me emphasize first that we have no confirmation yet for the report that John Wilkes Booth is in Port Conway, Virginia. During the past 12 days, we've had rumors that Booth was in Pennsylvania, that he was on board ship going to Europe, that he was in Maryland, in Canada, in Mexico, in fact, practically everywhere on the North American continent. But all these rumors, when nailed down, proved to be false, even fantastic. If, however, this report proves true, then the question arises, can Lieutenant Baker and Colonel Conger get to Port Conway in time to catch Booth? Never forget this. Booth is not standing still. He's desperate. He's on the move. The farther south he goes, the safer he becomes. Even suppose Baker and Conger do reach Port Conway before Booth gets out. Will they be able to capture him? Remember, they're in Confederate territory. Will a hostile population reveal Booth's whereabouts? And finally, how will these two detectives from the North stack up against the Confederate guerrillas? Although General Lee's army surrendered some days ago, many Confederate batteries have not yet stopped fighting. Mosby's brigade, for instance. Just a minute. John Daly and Ned Calmer are already in Port Conway, Virginia. Go ahead, Port Conway.
This is John Daly. John Wilkes Booth is in this vicinity. He was here in Port Conway yesterday afternoon, may still be here now. Lieutenant Baker, the detective in charge of this searching party, told me that much a moment ago. Our CBS mobile unit is at the dock of the Port Conway ferry, and Lieutenant Baker is inside the ferryman's shack questioning him. Ned Calmer has been given permission to go inside, and the moment anything develops, he'll come out and tell us. To piece together the story of what happened when the cavalrymen got here, I've asked one of these young cavalrymen to talk with us. His name is Tom Williams. He's a sergeant. His home is in Yonkers, New York. Tom, you fellows rode into town about an hour ago. What happened when you got here?
Well, as soon as we got in town, Lieutenant Baker and Colonel Conger started asking everybody we passed if they'd seen Booth anywheres around here. Nobody said they did. I don't know whether they were lying or not. But they just kept on stopping and asking people. And finally, down the road a ways, we stopped an old colored fella, and Lieutenant Baker showed him some pictures of Booth and the other fella, Harold, who's supposed to be with him. And
You mean Davy Harold, the stable boy who helped Booth escape from Washington?
Yeah, Harold, that's him. And this old colored fella said he'd seen him and Booth here in Port Conway yesterday. He said Booth stopped and asked him if there was a ferry across the river, and he told him how to find it. Well, when we heard that, we rode up here to the ferry on the double.
Well, Tom, what cavalry regiment is this that you're with?
We're a detachment from the 16th New York.
Did you volunteer for this mission?
No, we were detailed.
Any particular reason?
I guess because we're sharpshooters.
Oh, I see. Then are your orders to shoot Booth on sight?
No, we'll shoot if we have to, but our orders are to try to take him alive.
Do you think you're going to get him, Tom?
Sure, we'll get him. Nobody can do what he did and get away with it.
Well, Tom, if you fellows do capture Booth, do you think you'll get part of that $100,000 reward?
I don't know about that. The only thing is we got to get him, that's all.
All right, thank you, Tom.
Sure.
There's still no word as to what is happening inside that shack where they're questioning the man who runs the ferry. But here beside me now is another man here in Port Conway. He's Mr. Harry Murdoch. Mr. Murdoch, you're not a Virginian. You don't live here in Port Conway, do you?
Oh, no, I'm a Yankee from Chicago.
How do you happen to be here in Port Conway?
Well, I just happened to be in the vicinity, and I heard the report that Booth was supposed to be around here, so I came to scout around.
What do you think? Will they find Booth here?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know. I have a hunch he's not around here. This whole thing is just another wild rumor.
Oh?
Yes, I've been trying to tell Lieutenant Baker that, but he won't pay any attention to me.
Well, what do you do, Mr. Murdoch? Your occupation?
I'm a private detective, Murdoch Bureau of Investigation.
I see.
286 Wabash Avenue, Chicago.
Yes, well, the government has complained that you private detectives have been giving them false clues and wrong leads to deliberately throw them off Booth's trail.
Well, that's not true. Oh, there may be one or two unscrupulous operators in the field, so it's a case of the innocent being condemned with the guilty.
Well, I don't suppose, Mr. Murdoch, that with $100,000 reward at stake, you'd mind getting Booth first, would you?
Why, sure, that's only natural. But I'm trying to do everything I can to help the government.
Uh-huh.
I'm sincere about this. That's why I've been trying to tell Lieutenant Baker that he won't find Booth in this neck of the woods.
Well, Mr. Murdoch, where do you think Booth is hiding?
Well, there's no doubt about it. He's over in Lower Maryland. He could hide in that swampland for years, and they'd never find him.
Well, if you think Booth is in Maryland, what are you doing here?
Oh, as a matter of fact, I'm on my way to Maryland. I'm just passing through.
I see.
I saw the cavalry ride in, and I don't want them to lose time here when they could be somewhere else.
Yes.
See, I'm a very sincere
Excuse me, Mr. Murdoch. Excuse me, Mr. Murdoch.
Pardon me?
Excuse
In
me.
this case,
They're coming out of the ferryman's shack. One or two of the soldiers have just come out. And here come Baker and Conger. They have the ferryman with them. Baker has his revolver jammed into the ferryman's back. Lieutenant Doherty has called in the sentries. He's ordered the men to get ready to move on. Here's Ned Calmer.
Wilkes Booth is not here in Port Conway. He's somewhere across the river. He's heading south toward a town called Bowling Green. The ferryman here, his name is Rollins, took Booth and Harold across the river late yesterday afternoon. The ferryman said that 2 Confederate soldiers crossed with Booth and Harold, and he said he heard the actor boast to the soldiers that he had assassinated President Lincoln. The ferryman also revealed that Booth must have hurt his leg. He's hobbling on a homemade crutch. His leg is wrapped in an old muddy bandage. Also, Booth has shaved off his mustache. Lieutenant Baker got this information from the ferryman at the point of a gun. And now the cavalrymen are going to cross the river. They're getting their horses aboard the ferry boat. They're going after Booth in the direction of Bowling Green, and John Daly and I are going with them. So now back to Don Hollenbeck in Washington.
And so the manhunt goes on. Lieutenant Baker has definitely picked up Booth's trail now, but Booth is 24 hours ahead of the cavalry. And the question is whether Booth is in Bowling Green now, and if he is, why? There's perhaps one person in the country who might know the answer to those questions. Doug Edwards is with him in New York, so over to Doug Edwards.
I'm in the home of the distinguished actor Mr. Edwin Booth here in East 19th Street, New York. Mr. Edwin Booth is a brother of the hunted John Wilkes Booth. Mr. Booth, before any questions are put to you, is there anything you'd like to say?
Mr. Edwards, when a nation is overwhelmed with sorrow by a great public calamity, the mention of personal grief would, under ordinary circumstances, be an intrusion. But under those by which I am surrounded, I hope that a word from me will not be so regarded. It has pleased God to lay at the door of my afflicted family the blood of our deservedly popular president, crushed to earth by this dreadful event. I am sensible that other mourners are in the land. To them, one and all, go forth our deep, unutterable sympathy, our abhorrence and detestation of this most foul and atrocious crime.
Mr. Booth, do you know of any special reason why your brother should go to Bowling Green?
I don't know, Mr. Edwards. John was very popular wherever he played in the South. He had many friends there. But I know of no reason for him to go to Bowling Green, except the hope that some of his Confederate friends might offer him sanctuary.
Mr. Booth, would you tell us something about your brother? Many of us have seen him in the theater, but what is he like off the stage?
John was a wild, scatterbrained sort of boy, quite impulsive and theatrical. John is vain, self-conscious, too handsome for his own good, hot-tempered. Yet I've known him to be kind, gentle, full of fun, and I was happy that he was my brother. He was always his mother's darling, and this has crushed her heart and spirit.
Mr. Booth, do you have any idea why your brother killed President Lincoln?
He was insane. Insane on the subject of Lincoln. John's sympathies were always with the South, and he blamed Lincoln for all the South's troubles. I recall the day I told him I had voted for Lincoln. He flew into an insane rage and screamed at me that Lincoln wanted to be king of America. I imagine that the news of Lee's surrender drove his mind beyond the limits of reason.
Mr. Booth, somewhere in Virginia, at this very moment, they may be capturing your brother. Have you any comment to make?
I am sure that God will not permit him to go unpunished. He is my brother, but it is far better that he be dead than prolong this shame and humiliation by a public trial.
Thank you, Mr. Booth.
There is something I would like to add, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Booth, say anything you like.
I would like to say, for my mother and sister and my two remaining brothers and myself, that we pray that our loyalty as citizens will be judged by the record of the past. For our present position, we are not responsible. For the future, I shall carry a heavy heart, an oppressed memory, and a wounded name. Dreadful burdens to a too welcome grave.
Thank you, Mr. Edwin Booth. You mentioned that there are other mourners in the land. Some of them, at this moment, are in Little Falls, New York, waiting for the lonesome train, the train carrying the late President Lincoln to his last resting place in Springfield, Illinois. Ken Roberts has been on that train since it began its sad journey. We take you to him now aboard the lonesome train at Little Falls, New York.
The lonesome train is on a siding a few hundred yards up the track from the depot here at Little Falls, New York. It stopped a moment ago to take on water. Soldiers are standing at attention alongside of each car, and on the ground, in the gloom, are a handful of people, men and women. This lonesome train has passed through many of the great cities and heard the eulogies of high dignitaries, but here, behind these sad faces, are the farmers, the shopkeepers, the little people of whom Lincoln himself was one. They are standing here silently, their eyes running the length of this dimly lit six-car train, always pausing at the third car, which they know holds the casket of their beloved late president. Well, there's the train bell warning that we'll be moving in a minute. Now the soldiers of the honor guard are climbing back up into the cars, and this funeral train is about to continue its lonesome journey westward. Someone has begun to sing. Spontaneously, simply. It's the battle hymn of the Republic. Now others are joining in. Let's listen. The train is moving, pulling out of Little Falls. And now we have word that John Daly and Ned Calma have reached Bowling Green. So this is Ken Roberts switching you to the CBS mobile unit in Virginia.
This is Ned Calmer. Lieutenant Baker and the cavalry detachment rode into Bowling Green 20 minutes ago. They found out that one of the Confederate soldiers who came across the Port Conway ferry with Booth is here at the town hotel now. The soldier's name is Willie Jett. Booth and Harold may be with him. We're outside the hotel now waiting. John Daly is inside with Lieutenant Baker. The cavalry have the hotel completely surrounded, and now some of the townsfolk of Bowling Green have wandered up here to the hotel to see what's going on. Most of them have just put on a coat or a pair of pants over their night clothes. Here's John Daly coming out again. I'll turn the microphone over to him.
Booth is not here. He may be at a place called Garrett's Farm, a few miles up the road, the farm we passed on the way down here to Bowling Green. Lieutenant Baker got that information out of Willie Jett, who is here at the hotel. Jett said he left Booth and Davy Harold at Garrett's Farm last night. Lieutenant Baker has placed Jett under arrest. He's being taken along to point out the Garrett Farm. We're going there now, so back to Don Hollenbeck in Washington.
It begins to appear that Booth is getting help from some Southerners, and the big question now is the attitude of the entire South. How far will it go to help Booth escape? There's one man who might speak for the South. He's the former president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. Mr. Davis is in the custody of federal troops in Irwinsville, Georgia, but he's consented to make a statement. So we switch you now to Irwinsville, Georgia, and CBS correspondent Arthur Hannes.
Mr. Davis, what is the South's feeling about the assassination of President Lincoln by John Wilkes Booth?
I would like to say, have it fully understood, that the South does not, nor will it ever condone this cowardly, villainous act of John Wilkes Booth. I'll give you my assurance that the assassination of Lincoln was not plotted, nor given implement or comfort by any member of the Confederacy. History will prove that it was a conspiracy of certain congressmen to dispose of Abraham Lincoln and place a man of their choice in his place. All decent and honorable people in the southern states are shocked by his murder. Booth is no hero to us. He will be no martyr to the Confederacy. He will receive no welcome among the gentlemen and women of the South.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson Davis. John Daly and Ned Calmer have reached Garrett's farm, so we switch you to our mobile unit somewhere near Bowling Green, Virginia.
This is John Daly. The cavalrymen have surrounded the barn here at Garrett's farm. It's a small barn, only about 20 by 30 feet. Booth and Davy Harold are almost certainly in there. They were locked in by the young Garrett boys who were afraid they might steal their horses. When the cavalry came up, they roused the Garrett family and quickly found out that the two men Willie Jett had brought to the farm were still here. Lieutenant Baker has ordered young Garrett to open the barn door. Now Lieutenant Baker is speaking.
Inside the barn! Come out! Do you hear? Come out! Give yourselves up, or we'll set fire to the place and burn you out. Who are you? And what do you want?
That was a voice from inside the barn, a man's voice calling out, "Who are you and what do you want?" It may have been Booth's voice, if he is inside.
Makes no difference who we are. We have 50 armed men here. You have no chance to escape. Captain, there is a boy in here who wants to come out. Tell him to come out. If he comes out, I want it understood that he has nothing to do with anything I may be accused of. Tell him to hand his weapons out the door and then come out. The weapons are mine, and I am going to keep them.
It certainly seems to be Booth in there. The boy coming out must be Davy Harold, the boy who's been with Booth on this mad flight. A barn door is opening now, slowly. I can't see anyone yet. Yes, now someone is stepping out.
Grab him, man, grab him!
Two soldiers have grabbed him. They're bringing him up here to Lieutenant Baker. He's just a boy. Can't be more than 19. He seems to be giggling strangely and mumbling. Colonel Conger, who is it? Is it Harold?
It's Harold, all right. Booth is probably still in the barn. Is Booth in the barn there with you?
Yes, sir. But I didn't do nothing. Honest, I always liked Mr. Lincoln's jokes. Honest, I swear I didn't do nothing.
Take him over there by the house. If he moves, shoot. Move! Move!
As you can hear, Baker is calling into the barn again, and for the first time he has addressed Booth by name.
We know you're in there. Come out and surrender. This is a hard situation. I have blamed you. Give me a chance. Take your men 20 yards away, and I'll come out and fight your whole command. We didn't come here to fight. We came to take you prisoner. Come out and give yourself up. Give me time to think it over. I'll give you 1 minute, starting now.
Baker has just turned to confer with Colonel Conger. They're evidently going to wait out the minute, all right. Ned Calmer is over on the other side of the barn. Ned, have you anything to report?
Just this, John. A little while ago, I talked with Mrs. Garrett and her 2 daughters back at the house, and they told me they didn't know it was Booth who was here. They said, in fact, that when the 2 men came here yesterday with Willie Jett, they gave the false names of Boyd and Herrick. They told the Garretts they were Confederate soldiers on their way home from a Yankee prison camp. And now back to you, John.
I can see by my watch that there are about 25 seconds to go now. As yet, there's no sign from the barn as to whether or not Booth is going to surrender. There's no sound at all. He hasn't much time to decide, just about 15 seconds left, and if he doesn't come out, Lieutenant Baker is going to set fire to the barn, and of course, in that case, John Wilkes Booth will have an even more terrible choice: surrender or burn to death. There's Booth.
I have had a dozen chances to shoot you, but I don't want to kill you.
Booth has made his choice. He's not coming out. He swears that he'll never be taken alive, and now on orders from Lieutenant Baker, the preparations are being made to set the barn on fire and to burn Booth out. Soon he must come to a decision. I can see now that the soldiers are beginning to carry straw and brush around to the other side of the barn where Ned Calmer is. So go ahead, Calmer.
They're piling the straw at the side and rear of the barn out here, John. The plan is evidently to set the barn ablaze at the back, and that would drive Booth out through the front door. They're piling up the straw, all right, piling it up high. Now they're lighting handfuls of it, pushing it in through the cracks of the barn. Evidently more straw inside. One of the soldiers has just thrown a torch into this dry brush. It blazes up quickly. And now I can see a red glow inside the barn. It's getting brighter in there as the fire starts to take hold. Yes, I can see Booth in there. I can see him clearly through the cracks. I'm only a few yards away from where he is. The fire is lighting up the whole inside of the barn, almost like day. Yes, I can see Booth standing there, leaning on his crutch, his rifle in his hand. And now he's looking back at the flames behind him. He's limping up toward the door. I think he's coming out. Go ahead, John Daly.
The door is opening. Yes, it is opening. And John Wilkes Booth is now standing there defiantly, silhouetted against a background of flame. But now he's gone behind the door just a step. I can't see him. There's a shot. A shot. Booth has fallen to the floor of the barn. Maybe he shot himself. He said he'd never be taken alive. Baker and Conger have just rushed into the barn, and the barn is an inferno. It's going up quick. The dry brush has set the dry wood afire, and flames are climbing up into the sky, but they're carrying Booth out now, taking him a little ways up from the barn. Hey, let me through here, will you? Stand back! The guard won't let me through. A man is blocking my way. Booth is lying on the ground about 15 feet away. He's not dead, but he seems to be in agonizing pain. Blood is running down the back and side of his head. Baker and Conger are bending over him. His lips are moving. He's having difficulty breathing. And now Lieutenant Baker has gotten up. He's coming over this way. Lieutenant Baker! Say, Lieutenant Baker, how bad is Booth?
He's dying. We can't save him. Joe, get that card over here.
But, Lieutenant, I saw his lips move. What did he say?
He said, tell my mother I died for my country.
He was shot in the head, wasn't he?
Yes, behind the ear. In almost the identical spot he shot Lincoln.
But was he shot by one of your men, or did he shoot himself?
I don't know. That's what I'm going to try to find out now. All right, Joe.
Oh, wait a minute, Lieutenant.
Yes?
Are you certain that it's really Booth?
Of course it's Booth. Harold said Booth was in the barn with them. Besides, I've identified him positively.
But you just heard Lieutenant Baker say, without qualification of any kind, that the dying man is John Wilkes Booth. No one around here seems to be very happy. There's no anger, no spirit of revenge. There seems to be a sense of a grim job that had to be done.
April 26, 1865. John Wilkes Booth, the man who shot Lincoln, is captured and dies.